Most people move through life without any capacity to distinguish between fundamentally different orders of reality. They collapse everything into a single dimension, usually the material one, and then wonder why their solutions don't work and why their growth feels empty and why they're perpetually confused. The five lenses framework, which is what I'm going to talk about, is a discernment tool. And it's a tool I have created which allows you to see when you're asking, what should I do about X? Whether X is a relationship, a career, a crisis, or even a civilizational collapse. But what's happening here is you're actually asking five different questions simultaneously, and each one requires a different answer. The lenses are as follows. There is the material lens, the ethical lens, the human lens, the universal lens, and the practice lens. Now, these are not arbitrary categories. They represent distinct bandwidths of perception, each with its own logic, its own natural laws, its own way of being true. And the framework matters because without it, people make catastrophic category errors. They try to solve material problems with spiritual platitudes. They try to solve ethical dilemmas with human dimensions. They collapse the universal into the personal, or worse, they elevate personal preferences to cosmic law. So what I'm about to show you is how any topic, and I mean any topic, can be run through this framework to reveal layers that remain invisible without it. I want you to picture this. You're 24 years old. You're sitting in your third job interview this week, and the interviewer leans forward and asks you that inevitable question. I know, I've been there. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Do you deliver the answer you've been trained to give? Ambitious, specific, confident. You talk about leadership trajectory, skill development, how you can contribute to the company's growth. All well and good, but here's the thing. You have absolutely no idea what you actually want. You just know what you're supposed to want. You know the script and you're performing it flawlessly while something inside of you goes completely numb. That's one scenario. Or maybe you're 42 and you're sitting in your car in the parking lot before work and you realize, you know what? I've been doing this for 15 years, showing up, performing, achieving, and you cannot remember the last time you felt genuinely excited about anything because you've succeeded at everything you were told to succeed at. But somehow that success feels like a life sentence. Perhaps you're 36, scrolling through social media at midnight, looking at everyone else's highlight reels, and that familiar tightness returns to your chest, the sense that you're falling behind some invisible schedule that everyone else figured out the secret and you just missed the memo. This is the pressure cooker. And most people don't even realize they're inside of it until something breaks. And what I'm describing is the condition of enforced growth, being accelerated through developmental stages on someone else's timeline, according to someone else's metrics, towards someone else's definition of success. And here's what makes it so insidious. The pressure is everywhere and nowhere. It's in every form you fill out that reduces your complex life to check boxes. It's in every job interview where you're expected to perform certainty about a future you can't possibly know. It's in every advertisement showing you the life you're supposedly failing to achieve. And each instance seems harmless, but collectively they form a constant atmospheric pressure that says, this is what success looks like. This is what happiness looks like. And if you don't like this, you're failing. Now, most people respond to this pressure in one of two ways. They either push harder, trying to meet the demands, competing, optimizing every aspect of their lives until finally they burn out, or they collapse into confusion and despair, wondering why nothing they've achieved actually feels fulfilling. Both responses make perfect sense. Both responses are also symptoms of not having a framework to understand what's actually happening here. Most people move through life without any capacity to distinguish between fundamentally different orders of reality. They collapse everything into a single dimension, usually the material one, and then wonder why their solutions don't work, why their growth feels empty, why they're perpetually confused. So I've created the five lenses framework as a discernment tool. Now, these lenses are as follows. You have the material lens, you have the ethical lens, the human lens, the universal lens, and the lens of practice. These are not arbitrary categories. They represent distinct bandwidths of perception, each with its own logic, its own laws, its own way of being true. The framework matters because without it, people make catastrophic category errors. So let me show you exactly how this confusion operates, and then I'll demonstrate how the framework resolves it. So someone comes to me in my practice and they say, hey, you know what, Peter, I hate my job. It's crushing me, but I can't leave because I have responsibilities. What should I do? Now, watch what happens when you don't have this framework. Most people will answer from whatever lens they personally inhabit. So the material lens says, hey, calculate the numbers. Can you really afford to leave? If not, stay. If yes, leave. Pure material lens. But it completely ignores the ethical question of whether this situation is legitimate, the human question of what this is doing to their psyche, and the universal question of whether they're betraying their purpose. Now, the moralist will say, your employer is exploiting you. You have a right to dignity. Leave on principle, pure ethical lens. But it ignores the material reality of rent, paying the mortgage, buying food at the grocery store, the human complexity of fear and attachment, and the practice question of how to actually build a bridge to something else. Now, the therapist says, what does this bring up for you? What childhood pattern is being activated? Pure human lens. Endless exploration of subjective experience without any material strategy, ethical framework, or universal context. The spiritual teacher says, hey, you know what? Everything is perfect. This is your lesson. Surrender to what is, pure universal lens, which might be cosmically true, but offers zero guidance about actual choices in real time. So each answer is true within its lens, and each answer is catastrophically incomplete without the others. And I see from 30 years of practice, this is where people get stuck. They take one lens as the whole truth and then wonder why reality keeps contradicting them, and either blame themselves for not understanding or dismiss the lens they were using as useless. So the five lenses framework does something else entirely. It says this: your confusion isn't because you're not thinking clearly enough. Your confusion is because You're asking 5 different questions at once and treating them as one question. So when you can distinguish the lenses, you can see exactly where your confusion lies. As an example, are you trying to solve a material problem with ethical righteousness? Because you'll stay stuck in moral indignation while the rent becomes due. Or are you trying to solve an ethical violation with material pragmatism? Well, you'll compromise yourself into a corner you cannot escape. Are you trying to solve a human developmental crisis with universal philosophy? You'll have beautiful insights, but no transformation. Are you trying to solve a practice problem with more analysis? You'll understand what you need to understand, but it will change nothing. So, this framework gives you diagnostic precision. It lets you ask, which lens am I looking through right now? Which lens is this situation demanding? Where am I collapsing dimensions that need to remain distinct? So let me show you how this works with a real situation. I had a client, I'm going to call her Sarah. That's not her real name. Sarah is 38. She's a very successful marketing director at a well-known tech company, great salary, respected in her field. She comes to me and she says, I can't do this anymore, but I don't know what else to do. I feel trapped. Now, most advisors would immediately collapse into one lens and start giving solutions. But watch what happens when we don't. Watch what becomes visible when we look at Sarah's situation through all 5 lenses, one at a time. Let's start with the material lens. What happens when a system over accelerates? Now, from a neutral vantage point, what Sarah is experiencing is what I'm calling the pressure cooker. It's simply acceleration without integration. In ecology, this produces monocultures. In economies, bubbles, and in bodies, burnout. If you think of a rubber band, you can stretch it and it will return to its original shape. That's healthy stress. The system can integrate it. But if you keep that rubber band stretched tight 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, never letting it relax, eventually the molecular structure begins to break down. It doesn't snap all at once, but it develops micro tears. It loses elasticity. And then one day, under what seems like normal pressure, it disintegrates in your hand. That's what enforced growth does to the human nervous system. And that's what's happening to Sarah. So, from the material lens, Sarah's situation is about energetic bankruptcy. She's been extracting output, creativity, strategy, leadership faster than she can regenerate it. Her body is telling her this through the chronic fatigue, the insomnia, the digestive issues, the way Sunday nights fill her with dread. This isn't psychological weakness. This is a nervous system that's been driven past its bandwidth for far too long. A system driven faster than its natural resonance loses coherence and begins to decohere from within. Now, nothing here requires metaphysics. It's structural. Look at any field, any crop, any organization, or any psyche that has a bandwidth beyond which additional pressure stops generating growth and begins generating collapse. The farmer saturating his soil with fertilizers doesn't only risk poor yields, he makes the field barren. The corporation extracting maximum productivity from workers doesn't only risk turnover, it creates systemic fragility. This is thermodynamics. You cannot indefinitely extract more output than a system can integrate. So, under the material lens, the pressure cooker is not evil, it's unsustainable energetics. Look, the laws of entropy don't care about your quarterly targets or your cultural ambitions. The metropolis, the forced growth machine, operates on borrowed time and borrowed energy. So it runs hot until it burns out. This is observable, measurable, and predictable. You only have to open your eyes and look around you. Back to Sarah. Sarah's exhaustion isn't a personal failing, it's physics. Let's look at Sarah's situation from the ethical lens. And we're looking here at the question of consent and agency. So we move from what happens to what's wrong with what happens. The ethical friction around the pressure cooker arises from misaligned agency. And from the ethical lens, Sarah never chose marketing. Her parents pushed her towards a practical career after she graduated with a degree in English literature. Her talent for writing poetry was dismissed as not a real career. The ethical violation isn't that she's in marketing, it's the fact she was never given permission to discover what she actually wanted before being pressed into someone else's definition of success. When growth pressure comes from systems that benefit from productivity over selfhood, narratives that reward compliance over coherence, and roles that are assigned before maturity, something subtle breaks. The ethical question here is not, is growth good or bad? The ethical question is, was this pace chosen or was this pace imposed? Let me show you how this enforcement happens in the smallest, most pervasive ways. Every form you fill in that only has boxes for married or single, as if human partnerships could be reduced just to two categories, or every job that asks about a 5-year plan when you barely know what you want next year, every family dinner where your aunt asks when you're having children as if there's some kind of universal timeline for such things, every advertisement showing you the life you're supposed to want, the car, the house, the body, the vacation, the perfectly curated existence, each one individually seems harmless, but collectively they form a preemptive enforcement of cultural roles and norms. So you're being told, and from every direction, hey, there's a right way to live. There's a right timeline to follow. There's a right set of achievements to unlock. And if you deviate from the script, you're failing. You're being pressed into shapes that have nothing to do with your actual nature, your soul's calling, your trajectory, or what we call in astrology your north node. You're being made to compete for rewards that don't feed you, to chase ghosts of cultural success that leave you hollow. Coherence requires choice. The pressure cooker removes choice. The ethical violation is this: by what right does a culture demand that individuals sacrifice their developmental integrity for its economic engine? Under this lens, we see what's called adaptation or maturity or responsibility, which is really coerced deformation. The young, the bright, the enthusiastic are used up and discarded, not by accident, but by design. This isn't only unfortunate, it's ethically obscene. Now, I want to move to the human lens. And this is when you stop hearing yourself. Because the human lens brings us into lived experience, into the subjective dimension where the question becomes, what does this do to a person? Humans adapt brilliantly to strain, but not to distortion. When the chase for externally defined success replaces internal signal, the instinct goes quiet. When Sarah came to me and said, I don't know what else to do, this is the key. She literally doesn't know because for 20 years, she's been optimizing someone else's metrics. The voice that would tell her what she actually wants, her instinct, has been systematically trained into silence. There's a moment many people describe where they catch their reflection unexpectedly. Maybe it's in a store window or a bathroom mirror, and they have this uncanny feeling of not recognizing themselves, not physically, but something much deeper. I know I've done this myself. I thought, who is that person? And the disturbing answer was, I don't know. That stranger in the mirror is the accumulated result of 1,000 small compromises, each one reasonable at the time, each one moving further from whoever they were before the pressure cooker got them. Well, Sarah had this experience. I've had this experience. Sarah was walking through the airport after a business trip and she saw her reflection in a glass wall, felt this jolt of non recognition. Yes, in the reflection, she looked competent and professional and put together and completely unfamiliar. This loss of inner signal is not failure. It's an adaptive survival strategy in a system that rewards disconnection. You develop what I call a thick skin to sensibility of the natural kind. You deafen yourself to your own inner voice because that voice has been consistently overridden. So you learn to perform, to compete, to survive, but at the cost of authentic development. The cry, I just don't know who I am, doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from decades of being told that your instincts are wrong, that your natural rhythm and pace is insufficient, and that your authentic interests are irrelevant. So you've been trained to be a performance, a resume, a set of qualifications, but somewhere underneath is a being you've never met, a self that got buried under the rubble of cultural compliance. Middle age becomes a crisis, not because of biology, but because the scaffolding collapses. You've achieved everything you were told to achieve, and it's empty. You've become everything you were told to become, but you don't recognize yourself. So the human lens reveals the psychological architecture of the false self, the adaptive persona that learns to survive the pressure cooker, but loses contact with what would nourish you, who you actually are, what you actually want. The human lens asks, what would it mean to come home to yourself? What would natural growth look like if you weren't being force fed someone else's agenda? Now we ascend to the universal lens, where we ask, what is the larger pattern trying to express itself here? Now, from a harmonic standpoint, growth is not the universal law, expansion and contraction are. Growth is only one half of a cycle. The pressure cooker attempts to enforce growth by skipping contraction, skipping integration, skipping reflection, skipping death and rebirth cycles, and skipping stillness. But the universe does not skip cycles. It breathes. It lives. If you've ever seen time-lapse footage of a seed germinating, you know that nothing happens for days. The seed sits there apparently inert, but underground, invisible, the entire root system is establishing itself. Only after that foundation is built does the shoot emerge. This is natural timing. Natural growth honors what's invisible, but the pressure cooker would measure that seed daily and declare it unproductive. The pressure cooker would conclude the seed is failing simply because it hasn't emerged on schedule. This is the tragedy of enforced growth. Not moral tragedy, but cyclical blindness. Anything forced to accelerate without oscillation begins to fracture. Now, from a universal lens, Sarah's crisis is not a breakdown, it's an evolutionary pressure. Something in her is trying to emerge that cannot emerge within the current structure. The universe is asking her to spiral upward, but the pressure cooker only knows linear acceleration. There is a design to human development signposted by consciousness itself, by the very fact of having interiority, choice, which is the greatest gift we're given, discrimination. We're not random accidents being pressed into arbitrary social molds. We are expressions of a larger becoming that has its own trajectory, its own timing, its own necessity. The pressure cooker operates in opposition to the architecture of human purpose. It demands linear acceleration when natural development spirals. It demands constant output when natural cycles require rest. It demands immediate results when transformation requires composting, the necessary breaking down of what no longer serves before new growth can emerge. The universal lens reveals what we call nature isn't only biology, it's the pattern of right relationship that exists between the part and the whole, the individual and the cosmos. When you force grow a human being, you're not only damaging them, you are disrupting their capacity to fulfill their role in the larger order. This is the universal recognition. There is a higher order and it's accessible, and aligning with it is our actual work, building what I call an inner sanctuary of higher perception. Now we move to the practice lens, or the lens of coherence. And this is the fifth lens, which is where everything lands. What is the practice? What do you actually do? Because you can understand all of the other four previous lenses and still be crushed by the machinery if you don't have a method, a practice, a daily discipline that builds the sanctuary from within. From the practice lens, Sarah doesn't need a career coach or a therapist or a spiritual awakening as separate interventions. She needs to build her inner sanctuary, one that builds inner stability and outer equilibrium, a place where she can start listening to signals she's been ignoring for 2 decades. The inner sanctuary is not a fortress. It's not an identity. It's a place of rhythm, a place of pacing. It's the point inside a human where choosing replaces reacting, listening replaces performing, integration replaces acceleration, and breath replaces pressure. This is what it means to become your own architect of an inner sanctuary. You're building something that the pressure cooker cannot reach, cannot coerce, cannot manipulate, cannot force grow. This is not a heroic act. It's a recalibration from system pulse to organism pulse. Now, the practices include self-care as defense, not indulgence, but the maintenance of your natural bandwidth. For Sarah, what this meant was her learning to recognize when she was running on fumes and stopping instead of pushing through, which means that she could rediscover activities that had nothing to do with productivity. Walking without her phone, cooking without recipes, sitting quietly without purpose. It's about keen persistence because the pressure cooker doesn't relent, so neither can you. And this isn't about willpower. It's about the small steps into a bigger world, but those steps have to be consistent, small acts of refusal and redirection. So Sarah started saying no to meetings that weren't essential. She stopped checking her email after 7 p.m. She began protecting mornings for writing, not marketing copy, but real writing that fed her soul. The lens of practice includes love, a love of natural things, which means returning your nervous system to non-manufactured rhythms. For Sarah, she started spending time near water, noticing the seasons, paying attention to when she was actually hungry, as distinct from when she felt anxious. And yeah, it includes perception training. It includes learning to see when you're being coerced, when you're being manipulated, when you're collapsing under pressure, when you're betraying your own developmental timing. The practice is learning to distinguish what actually nourishes me versus what have I been told should nourish me. So the practice lens asks, how do you operationalize understanding? How do you move from insight to embodiment? You have to develop strategic refusal. What do I mean by that? This is the capacity to say no to what anyone else calls yes, and to withdraw from competitions you were never meant to enter, to stop performing for systems that will never see you. And simultaneously, you must engage in constructive self-authorship, actively building this sanctuary, stone by stone, perception by perception, choice by choice. And that means paying attention to what nourishes you versus what you've been told should nourish you. Beware of the tyranny of shoulds. It means reestablishing contact with your instincts, which have been gagged by cultural enforcement. The inner sanctuary is simply a place where your timing matters more than the world's timing. The practice is not transcendent, it's faithful presence to your own becoming in defiance of every pressure to rush, to conform, to produce on someone else's timeline. So you see one person, one situation, 5 completely distinct angles of analysis. Each lens reveals something the others don't. Each has its own validity, its own logic, its own necessity. But here's the crucial point. You cannot collapse these lenses without creating confusion. The material answer will not solve the ethical problem. The universal insight won't give you the daily practice. The human experience won't change the structural dynamics. If you only looked at Sarah through the material lens, you'd tell her to take a vacation or switch jobs. You'd be treating symptoms, not causes. If you look through the ethical lens, you tell her, quit on principle, but you're ignoring the fact she has a mortgage and elderly parents depending on her income. If you only look through the human lens, you'd explore her childhood forever without ever addressing the structural forces that keep recreating the same pattern. And if you only look through the universal lens, you'd give her cosmic perspective without practical tools. Without the practice lens, all 4 previous lenses remain academic, remain theoretical. But when you can move fluidly between all 5, when you can distinguish which lens you're looking through at any moment, then you have the cartography of coherence. Then you're not only reacting to life, you're consciously navigating multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously. And here's what makes this framework genuinely transformative. It teaches you to catch yourself in the moment of category collapse. You'll be talking to someone and suddenly recognize, oh, they're trying to solve a material problem with spiritual bypassing. Or you'll notice yourself thinking, I'm demanding an ethical answer to what is actually a human fear. This real-time discernment is what changes everything, because the moment you can see which lens you're operating through, you can ask, is this the appropriate lens for this situation? Am I missing something by only looking through this one angle? What happens if I shift lenses deliberately? That's the practice. That's the skill. And once you develop it, you never move through reality the same way again. You become architecturally sophisticated about your consciousness, about which dimension of reality you're engaging with at any given moment. Let me leave you with this. The pressure cooker, the enforced growth, is not only a societal malfunction, it's a phase misalignment between natural tempo and imposed tempo. I'll say that again. It's a phase misalignment between natural tempo and imposed tempo. So when a person realizes midlife that their achievements feel hollow, it's rarely because they grew up wrong. It's because they grew on someone else's timeline. Natural growth is not linear. It spirals. It rests. It listens. It composts what it no longer needs. And it grows again. The pressure cooker leaves no room for composting. Coherent growth requires it. And this is what I mean when I talk about it on my channel by the cartography of coherence. It's not mystical, it's precise. It's not vague, it's diagnostic. And I trust in what I've shown you today is a map of different territories of human experience, each with its own laws, its own logic, its own way of being true. When you can read this map fluently, when you can see which terrain you're actually navigating at any moment, you stop making catastrophic navigational errors. You stop trying to use material tools in universal territory. You stop trying to solve ethical violations with human emotions. The five lenses framework gives you the tools to stop being a victim of category confusion and become someone who can navigate multiple dimensions of reality with fluency and skill. This is cartographic work. This is mapping the territories of consciousness so you can move through them with precision, as distinct from stumbling in the dark. That's what this framework offers. And that's what I'd like to share with you as my audience, not as philosophy, but as practical cartography that you can start using immediately to find coherence where there's been nothing but confusion for many years. If what I've laid out here resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in the pressure cooker, if you're tired of category confusion masquerading as wisdom, and if you're ready for navigational precision instead of vague inspiration, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel. I'm going to be releasing solo transmissions like this on a weekly basis, mapping different territories of human consciousness and development through the five lenses framework. And I'll also be bringing in a select number of guests, spiritual teachers, astrologers, coaches, psychologists, healers, practitioners, doing substantive work to explore their methodologies through this same framework. These won't just be interviews where we talk about their work, but deep cartographic explorations where we apply the 5 lenses to see what becomes visible that's been invisible before. And this, I trust, will reveal both the strengths and the blind spots in any given approach, where it operates brilliantly and where it's making category errors. I don't see this as entertainment necessarily, and it's not spiritual performance. This is substantive cartographic work for people who are serious about developing genuine discernment. So hit the notification bell so you don't miss these weekly transmissions. And if this particular piece on the 5 lenses framework served you, if it gave you clarity where there was confusion, please hit the like button, because it helps this work reach the people who actually need it, the ones who are ready to stop spinning in circles and start navigating with precision. The territory ahead is vast. The map is being drawn. And I want to invite you to follow along as we chart it together week by week, lens by lens, territory by territory, both through my solo transmissions and through these selective dialogues with practitioners whose work warrants this level of examination. I'm Peter Michael Dedes, and this is Consciousness Compass. Thank you for listening.